Eleanor Harris stood at the edge of the cliff, gazing down at the sprawling town of Whitby beneath the thick mist. It had been years since she'd set foot here. The town, though picturesque, always carried a shadow of memories she could never quite escape. But now she had no choice. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her after her parents' untimely death, had passed away. The will was clear. Eleanor was to return to Whitby to claim what was left behind. The house was waiting for her, an old creaking mansion perched on the edge of the town, looking out over the sea. It was a place filled with family history, but also with secrets. Eleanor had never quite understood the strange relationship her grandmother had with the house. There was always something in the air that felt off, something unspoken. But now, Eleanor was determined to uncover whatever it was. As she entered the mansion, the floorboards groaned under her weight. The air smelled of old wood and dust, and the faint sound of a clock ticking echoed through the empty halls. It was then that Eleanor noticed something peculiar. On the mantelpiece was a letter, yellowed with age. She reached for it, unfolding the delicate paper, her fingers trembling slightly as she read the words that would change everything. Stay for 1 month. You will uncover the truth of our family. But beware, not all things should be uncovered. The letter had no signature, yet Eleanor knew it was meant for her. The warning was clear, and Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that her return to Whitby had stirred something long buried. As the day turned to night, Eleanor settled in, her thoughts consumed by the mysterious letter. But when the wind howled outside, and the house creaked, it felt as though something or someone was watching her. She shook the feeling off, convincing herself it was just the house settling. But the gnawing unease remained. Outside, the mist thickened, and Eleanor couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead for her in the shadows of Whitby. Eleanor woke to the sound of rain pounding against the windows, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the heavy weight in her chest. The house was eerily quiet, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed overnight. The letter still lingered in her mind, its warning clear, its meaning uncertain. She had only just arrived, yet she felt like she had been here for a lifetime. The mansion, though beautiful, was a labyrinth of rooms and corridors. The walls, lined with dark wood panels, seemed to absorb the light, casting long shadows that flickered like ghosts in the corners of her eyes. Eleanor found herself wandering through the house, each room more suffocating than the last. The silence was oppressive, as though the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. As she passed the old family portraits hanging on the walls, Eleanor felt a strange sense of familiarity mixed with a growing unease. These were faces she had seen before, but they looked different now, distorted somehow, as though they were hiding something. Her grandmother's portrait in particular seemed to watch her more intently than the others, as if urging her to stay. Eleanor shivered and quickly moved on. It wasn't until she reached the study that something truly unsettling happened. The room was filled with old books, their spines cracked with age, their pages yellowed and fragile. But it was the desk in the corner that caught her attention. There, amidst the clutter, was an old wooden box. The box was intricately carved with symbols Eleanor couldn't understand, and it seemed to pulse with an energy that made her uneasy. She reached for the box, her fingers trembling. As she lifted it, a strange coldness seeped into her skin. It was as though the box had been waiting for her, its presence a silent invitation. With a deep breath, Eleanor opened the lid. Inside, she found a collection of old letters and documents, each one marked with the same seal she had seen on her grandmother's letter. The documents were written in a language Eleanor didn't recognize, and her heart raced as she flipped through the pages. Among the papers was a photograph of a man she didn't recognize, standing in front of the mansion. His face was obscured, but his posture was familiar. It was as if he had been watching her, waiting for her to find him. Eleanor's mind raced. Who was this man, and what did he have to do with her family? Why was he in the photograph, and why was his face hidden? The questions swirled in her mind, but before she could examine the photograph further, a loud bang echoed through the house. Eleanor jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound came from upstairs. With hesitation, Eleanor made her way up the creaking staircase, her footsteps echoing in the quiet house. As she reached the top, she noticed the door to her grandmother's old bedroom was ajar. She hadn't intended to enter, but something compelled her to go inside. The room was just as she remembered it, furniture draped in white sheets, the bed neatly made, and the air heavy with the scent of lavender. But there, in the corner of the room, something was out of place. A small wooden chest, one that Eleanor had never seen before, sat at the foot of the bed. It was old, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. Eleanor approached it cautiously, her breath shallow. As she knelt to open the chest, her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. Inside, she found a key that seemed to hum with energy, its surface engraved with more of the strange symbols from the box downstairs. Her heart skipped a beat. This key, like the box, seemed to be meant for her. But for what? What door did it unlock? And why had her grandmother hidden it away in such a secretive place? The answers seemed just out of reach, like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Eleanor's curiosity, however, was stronger than her fear. She couldn't help but feel that she was on the edge of something significant, something that would reveal the truth about her family, her past, and the mansion that held so many secrets. As Eleanor stood there, holding the key, she could feel the weight of the house's history pressing down on her. Every room, every corner, every shadow seemed to whisper of things long forgotten. The mystery was far from over, and Eleanor knew that she had only just begun to uncover the truth. The key felt heavy in Eleanor's palm, its cold metal pressing into her skin, almost as if it were alive. She couldn't understand why, but it seemed to have some kind of power over her, like it was drawing her towards something she wasn't ready to face. Despite the gnawing fear in her gut, she couldn't help but feel the pull, a need to uncover the mystery it promised to unlock. The next morning, Eleanor found herself standing before the library door, the key now securely tucked into her coat pocket. The Grand Library had always been one of her favorite places in the mansion, a sanctuary of knowledge and solitude. But today it felt different. The walls of books, once comforting, now seemed to loom over her, their silent gaze watching her every move. The air was thick with dust, the smell of old pages and leather filling the room. Eleanor approached the desk at the far end of the room, where her grandmother used to sit, reading for hours on end. The desk was covered in papers, some old and yellowed, others still fresh. It was a mess, a sharp contrast to the usually orderly nature of the mansion. As she sifted through the papers, her heart skipped a beat when she noticed a familiar symbol, one that matched the engraving on the key. The symbol was drawn hastily in the corner of a torn page, surrounded by scribbles that seemed nonsensical. But beneath the chaos of the writing, Eleanor could make out a name that chilled her to the bone. It was her father's name, written in ink so dark it looked like it had been soaked in shadows. Her mind raced. Why would her father's name be written here? He had passed away years ago, yet it felt as though he was still a presence in the house, his shadow lingering in every corner. Was there something he had known? Something he had kept from her all this time? As she continued to examine the papers, a sense of urgency began to rise within her. The key, the symbol, the name, it was all connected, but to what? Eleanor's pulse quickened as she searched for any clue that would bring the pieces of the puzzle together. Suddenly, her fingers brushed against something cold beneath the pile of papers. It was a small drawer, hidden away in the side of the desk. With trembling hands, she pulled it open, revealing a thick, leather-bound book. The cover was unmarked, but Eleanor could feel the weight of it, the heaviness of its secrets pressing against her chest. She opened the book carefully, the pages crackling as she turned them. The text was written in the same strange language as the document she had found earlier, and though she couldn't understand the words, the pictures in the margins spoke volumes. They were sketches of the mansion, of her family, and of places she had never seen before. But there was one image that stood out, a drawing of a hidden room deep within the house, marked by a symbol she had seen before. It was the same symbol as the key. Her heart pounded as she flipped through the pages, desperate to find more. But just as she was about to reach the last page, a sharp knock at the door startled her, causing the book to fall from her hands. She quickly scrambled to pick it up, but when she looked up, the room was empty. The door was still closed, and there was no one in sight. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Had she imagined the knock? Or had someone been watching her? She couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion was not as empty as it seemed. It was as though the house itself was alive, its walls breathing with secrets long buried. With trembling hands, Eleanor picked up the key once more, its cold metal feeling like an anchor in her palm. She had to find the hidden room. She had to unlock whatever it was that her family had kept hidden for so long. Without a moment's hesitation, Eleanor made her way back to the hallway, determined to follow the trail of clues that had led her to this point. As she passed the staircase, she glanced up at the darkened hallway above. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was deafening. But she pressed on, the key now burning in her pocket, her mind set on uncovering the truth. She knew she was getting closer, that the answers were within her grasp. But the further she went, the more she felt the weight of her decision. What if the truth was more than she could handle? What if uncovering it would destroy everything she thought she knew about her family, about herself? But there was no turning back now. The key, the book, the hidden room. It was all part of something bigger, something that Eleanor couldn't ignore. And as she stepped into the darkness of the mansion, she knew that the shadows were closing in around her. The past was no longer just a memory. It was alive, and it was waiting to be uncovered. The mansion seemed to grow quieter the further Eleanor ventured, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for her to unlock the secrets buried within its walls. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the silence, each step taking her closer to the unknown. Her heart was racing, the key burning in her pocket, urging her forward. She knew the hidden room was nearby. But where? The house was labyrinthine, its long corridors twisting and turning in ways that made it easy to get lost. Eleanor had spent hours wandering through these hallways as a child, but now, as an adult, they felt alien. The walls seemed to close in on her, their cold stone surfaces pressing in from all sides. She paused for a moment, catching her breath, and glanced at the doorways around her. They all seemed identical, yet one of them felt different. The air was thicker here, heavier, as though something was just beyond the door, waiting. Eleanor approached the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. The wood was worn smooth by years of use, its surface dark with age. She paused, her mind racing with possibilities. Was this it? Was this the room she had been searching for? She could almost hear the faint sound of whispers from behind the door, as though the house itself was alive, calling her to enter. With a deep breath, Eleanor turned the handle and stepped inside. The room was unlike any she had seen before in the mansion. It was small, the walls lined with shelves crammed with old books and dusty artifacts. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and wood, the faintest trace of something older, something forgotten. At the far end of the room, a large ornate mirror stood against the wall, its surface cracked, as though it had seen decades of history pass before it. Eleanor moved toward the mirror, the feeling of dread and anticipation growing with every step. She reached out and gently touched the glass. It was cold to the touch, and she could feel a strange hum beneath her fingertips. The cracks in the mirror seemed to pulse, as though they were alive, as though they were waiting for something. She took a step back and examined the rest of the room. On a table nearby, she noticed an old, leather-bound journal. It was thick, with a golden clasp that had long since tarnished. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the symbol etched on the cover. It was the same symbol as the key. The same symbol she had seen in the documents and the book. Without hesitation, Eleanor reached for the journal. The moment her fingers brushed the leather, the room seemed to shift. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to groan, as if the mansion itself were reacting to her discovery. The door behind her slammed shut with a deafening crash, and Eleanor spun around, her breath catching in her throat. The room was suddenly darker, the shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. She had no choice but to open the journal. With shaking hands, she unclasped the cover, the metal clicking loudly in the silence. The pages inside were yellowed with age, the ink faded in places but still legible. As Eleanor began to read, the words seemed to blur, the sentences twisting and shifting as though they were not meant to be understood. But one phrase stood out, clear and sharp: "The truth is hidden in the mirror." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The mirror. It was the key to everything. But what did it mean? What was the mirror hiding? Was it a reflection of the past? Or something more sinister, something that had been locked away for years? She felt a sudden compulsion to return to the mirror. Slowly, she moved towards it, her feet heavy as though the room itself were holding her back. The cracks in the glass seemed to grow wider, more jagged, as if the mirror were reacting to her presence. She reached out again, her fingers trembling as they brushed the surface. The moment she touched the glass, a sharp, cold sensation shot through her body, and the world around her seemed to blur. For a split second, Eleanor saw something in the mirror. Something not reflected in the room behind her. It was a figure, a shadow standing just beyond the glass. It was her father. His face was distorted, a mix of anguish and anger, and he was reaching out towards her. She recoiled, stumbling back, her heart pounding in her chest. The mirror had shown her something that she wasn't ready to face. Before she could collect herself, the door to the room opened, and she turned to find herself staring at James. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He had been searching for her. He had known something was wrong. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice shaking. Eleanor could barely answer, her mind reeling from what she had just seen. The mirror, her father's face, the journal. Everything was connected, but she didn't understand how. She looked back at the mirror, but the shadow was gone. All that remained was her reflection, staring back at her with wide eyes. I think I found the truth," she whispered, but the words felt hollow, empty. The truth was out there, but it was slipping away from her grasp, like sand through her fingers. James stepped into the room, his gaze following hers to the mirror. He seemed to understand the weight of the moment, his face hardening with resolve. "We need to get out of here. There's something wrong with this place, Eleanor. Something dangerous." But Eleanor didn't move. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the mirror. The haunting image of her father still burned into her mind. The past had come alive in the most terrifying way, and she knew that there was no turning back now. The truth was waiting for her, just beyond the glass, and she had to face it. No matter what it cost her. Eleanor stood frozen in front of the mirror, her heart hammering in her chest. The room seemed to pulse with a strange energy, the air thick with the weight of the truth she had uncovered. James's voice felt distant, as if it were coming from far away, but she could still hear him, his words trying to reach her. "We need to leave, Eleanor. Whatever this is, we don't understand it yet. We have to get out of here before it's too late." But she couldn't move. The mirror's reflection had changed her, bound her to its dark allure. She could still see her father's face, distorted and desperate, reaching through the glass. His eyes held secrets, painful truths she had never been ready to hear. His voice echoed in her mind, a whisper she couldn't ignore. "You have to finish what I started, Eleanor. Only you can do it." The words swirled around her, growing louder, more insistent. Eleanor's mind raced, trying to make sense of them, but she couldn't. The more she tried to understand, the more the room seemed to close in on her. The walls seemed to bend, the shadows stretching longer and longer, as though the house itself was coming alive, reacting to her presence. James reached out, gently placing his hand on her shoulder, trying to pull her away from the mirror. But Eleanor couldn't look away. She had to know. She had to understand what her father had left behind. "Eleanor, please," James begged, his voice breaking through her haze. "I don't know what's going on, but we need to get out of here. This place isn't safe." It never was. But Eleanor's gaze remained locked on the reflection. There was something there, something she hadn't seen before. The figure of her father seemed to shift, moving closer, his face more distinct now, his mouth forming words that she couldn't quite hear. But she understood somehow. He was telling her something, something important. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself, but the image of her father lingered, haunting her. And then, in that fleeting moment of clarity, she understood what she had to do. The mirror wasn't just a reflection of the past. It was a portal, a gateway to a different time. A time when her father had been alive. And somehow, he was reaching out to her, trying to communicate something vital, something she needed to see. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor stepped forward, her hand trembling as it reached out towards the cold glass. Her fingers brushed against it, and in that instant, everything changed. The world around her shifted, the air growing colder, denser. The walls of the room seemed to disappear, replaced by a dense fog that swallowed everything in its path. Eleanor could hear her own breath, shallow and quick, as she felt herself being pulled into the mirror. The sensation was dizzying, like falling through time and space, but she couldn't stop herself. She had to follow her father's call. The fog thickened, and she felt her body being pulled through it, her surroundings dissolving into a blur of gray and black. She could feel the presence of her father, his energy surrounding her, guiding her. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the fog cleared, and she was standing in a different place. She was no longer in the mansion. The world around her was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of an old lantern hanging from a wooden beam above her head. The air was thick with dust, and the floor beneath her feet creaked with every step. She could hear the distant sound of footsteps, faint but unmistakable. Someone was here. Her eyes darted around the room, trying to make sense of her surroundings. It was an old house, much older than the mansion she had just left behind. The walls were bare, the wood rotting in places. This place felt abandoned, forgotten, but there was a strange sense of familiarity about it. And then she saw him. Her father. He was standing at the far end of the room, his back turned to her, as though he hadn't noticed her arrival. He was older now, his face more worn, but it was unmistakably him. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat as she took a tentative step forward. "Father," she called, her voice trembling. But he didn't turn around. Instead he spoke, his voice low and raspy. "You shouldn't be here, Eleanor. This place was never meant for you." Eleanor's chest tightened, the words hitting her like a physical blow. "What is this place? Why are we here? What did you leave behind?" Her father turned slowly, his eyes filled with sorrow, regret, and something darker. "This is where it all began," he said quietly. "The house you see now, the mansion, was only a reflection of what happened here. The truth lies buried in this place, but it's too dangerous for you to know. You have to leave." "No," Eleanor whispered, shaking her head. "I need to understand. I need to know why you left me with nothing." Her father's face softened for a moment, as though he were about to say something, but then his expression hardened. "The truth will destroy you, Eleanor. It's already too late. The darkness that haunts this house has been passed down to you. You cannot escape it." Eleanor stepped closer, her resolve hardening. "I don't care. I need to know. I have to finish what you started." Her father's eyes widened, and he reached out, grabbing her arm with surprising strength. "You don't understand," he whispered urgently. "The mirror, it's not just a window to the past. It's a portal. A portal to a darkness that cannot be undone." But it was too late. Eleanor pulled her arm free and turned to face the shadows around her. The room was shifting, the air growing heavier with each passing moment. The darkness was closing in on her, but Eleanor was ready. She had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. The air around Eleanor grew colder still, a biting chill that seeped deep into her bones. The darkness in the room thickened, almost as though it were a living, breathing entity, wrapping around her like an invisible hand. The lantern's weak glow flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Eleanor's heart raced, but she stood firm, her resolve hardening. She had come too far to turn back now. Her father's words echoed in her mind, warning her of the danger that lay ahead. But they only made her more determined. Whatever this was, she had to see it through. The truth, however dark, needed to be uncovered. Suddenly, the footsteps she had heard earlier grew louder, closer. Eleanor's pulse quickened, and she instinctively reached for the knife she had tucked into her belt. The cold metal gave her a strange comfort, a reminder that she was in control of her fate, no matter how terrifying the path before her seemed. From the corner of her eye, she saw a figure moving in the shadows. It was a shape, human-like, but not quite right. It shifted unnaturally, its movements jerky and disjointed. Eleanor's grip on the knife tightened, her instincts screaming at her to be ready for whatever was coming. The figure stepped into the dim light of the lantern. It was a man, but his features were distorted, his face obscured by a shadowy veil. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. The man's eyes, however, were unmistakable. They were dark, hollow, and filled with a deep sorrow. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said, his voice low and raspy. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. The man stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he were trying to savor the moment. "I am the one who was lost," he said, his voice echoing in the silence. "I am the one who fell into the abyss your father tried to escape." Eleanor's mind spun, trying to make sense of his words. She had heard stories of her father's past, of the things he had done, but never of this. Never of someone like this. "What do you want from me?" Eleanor asked, her voice hardening. She gripped the knife tighter, ready to defend herself if it came to that. The man smiled, but it was not a comforting smile. It was twisted, filled with a cruel amusement. "I want what you have," he said. "Your father left you something, didn't he? Something that you need to find. And I will help you, in exchange for something of yours." Eleanor narrowed her eyes, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" she demanded. The man's smile faded, and he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You'll understand soon enough," he said, his voice taking on a darker edge. "But first, you must face the truth. The truth of your father's mistakes. The truth of the darkness that has been passed down to you." Eleanor took a step back, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had no idea what he meant, but she could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. The darkness was real. It was here in this place, and it was closing in around her. The man raised his hand, and the shadows seemed to respond, swirling around him like a storm. The air grew even colder, and the lantern's light flickered one last time before going out completely, plunging the room into pitch blackness. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. She could feel the man's presence, hear his footsteps drawing closer. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way out. The darkness seemed endless, consuming everything in its path. Suddenly, the man's voice cut through the silence. "You cannot escape it, Eleanor. It's already inside you." Before Eleanor could react, she felt something brush against her arm, something cold and insistent. She swung the knife blindly, but it hit nothing but air. Her breath came faster now, panic rising in her chest. Then she felt it, a tug, a sharp pull at her heart, as if something deep inside her was being dragged toward the man. Her body jerked, but she couldn't move. The shadows were holding her, binding her, suffocating her. "You can't run from this, Eleanor," the man said again, his voice now a whisper. "It's your inheritance. The legacy of your father's sins. And now it's your burden to bear." In that moment, Eleanor realized something that chilled her to the core. The darkness wasn't just something she had to escape. It was a part of her. It had always been a part of her. The mistakes her father had made, the secrets he had kept, had been passed down to her, woven into the very fabric of her being. And now, there was no turning back. The man's laughter echoed in the darkness, filling the room with an eerie, hollow sound. Eleanor's knees buckled, and she fell to the ground, unable to fight the pull any longer. The shadows closed in around her, and she could feel herself being swallowed whole by the abyss. But just as everything seemed lost, she heard a voice, a faint whisper, barely audible over the man's mocking laughter. "Eleanor! Eleanor!" Her father's voice. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. It was him. He was still out there, still trying to reach her. She pushed herself up, her hand shaking, and screamed into the darkness. "Father! Help me!" The man's laughter ceased abruptly. The shadows faltered, swirling around her as though they were unsure of what to do. And in that moment of hesitation, Eleanor saw it, a flicker of light, a shadowy figure standing in the distance. Her father. He was reaching out to her. Eleanor stood motionless in the thickening shadows, her breath shallow and quick. The cold air pressed against her skin, seeping into her very bones. The figure before her seemed to grow larger, more ominous, as though the darkness itself was feeding on her fear. His words echoed in her mind, each one like a blow to her chest. The price of truth. What did it mean? And what price was she truly willing to pay? The man before her, this shadowed figure, with his hollow eyes and twisted smile, had somehow drawn her into a world she could not understand. He spoke of her father's sins, of the legacy he had left behind, but what did that mean for her? Was she destined to carry the burden of his mistakes? Or was there more to this twisted tale than she had been told? As Eleanor's mind raced, the figure's presence grew more oppressive, the air around her thick with an almost tangible weight. She felt as though she were being suffocated by the very room itself. The lantern that had once offered comfort now seemed like a feeble flicker of light, a reminder of how little she truly understood. "You think you can escape this," the man said, his voice dripping with disdain. "But you can't. Not anymore. The truth is already inside you, Eleanor. It's been there all along." Her mind spun, the words crashing against her consciousness. Her father had always warned her about the dangers of digging too deep, of unearthing secrets that were never meant to be found. But could she really walk away from this now, knowing the man in front of her held the key to something far greater than she had ever imagined? The darkness around her seemed to pulse, moving in rhythm with the beating of her heart. The room, once familiar, now felt like a prison. There was no escape. No way out. "I have no choice," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her stomach. "I have to know the truth." The figure chuckled, a low, haunting sound that sent chills crawling up her spine. "You're wrong. There's always a choice. But you must understand something. The truth is not a gift, Eleanor. It's a curse. A curse. The word lingered in her mind like a poisonous whisper. What if uncovering the truth about her father's past meant unraveling everything she had ever known? What if the price of that truth was more than she could bear? Suddenly, the room shifted. The walls seemed to close in around her, and the shadows took on a life of their own. Eleanor felt her breath catch in her throat as she reached for the knife at her side, her fingers trembling. The figure in front of her was still smiling, but now his smile seemed almost sadistic, as though he knew something she didn't. "You think the knife will save you?" he sneered. "You've already been touched by the darkness. You can't fight it." But Eleanor didn't waver. Her grip tightened around the hilt of the knife, and for a fleeting moment, she felt a surge of power coursing through her veins. This was her choice, her battle. No one else could fight this for her. The figure stepped closer, his face now inches from hers. She could feel the coldness of his breath against her skin. His words like a sharp, jagged knife. "You think you can stop this? You think you can stop me?" he hissed. Eleanor's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She held the knife out in front of her, its cold steel reflecting the dim light of the lantern. "I will stop you," she said, her voice low but filled with a quiet fury. For a moment, there was silence. Then, without warning, the figure lunged toward her, his hands reaching out like claws. Eleanor reacted instinctively, slashing the knife through the air. It caught him across the chest, but the figure didn't flinch. He simply laughed, a cruel hollow sound that filled the room. "You think you can defeat me with a mere blade?" he taunted. "You are nothing, Eleanor. You cannot escape what you are." Eleanor stumbled back, the weight of his words crushing her. But deep inside, a spark of defiance remained. She would not let him win. Not now. Not ever. With all the strength she could muster, she lunged forward, driving the knife into the figure's chest with a force she didn't know she had. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The room fell silent, and the figure's smile faded. His eyes, once filled with darkness, seemed to lose their luster. And then, with a violent shudder, the figure collapsed to the ground, vanishing into the shadows as though he had never been there. Eleanor stood panting, her body trembling from the adrenaline. Her eyes scanned the room, half expecting the figure to reappear, but there was nothing. The darkness remained, but the oppressive weight had lifted. For the first time, she could breathe freely. She had won. For now. But the victory felt hollow. She knew this wasn't over. The shadows still lurked, waiting for her to make the next move. And whatever the man had meant about her father's legacy, Eleanor knew one thing for certain. The truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. And she would find it, no matter what the cost. The room remained silent as Eleanor stood over the figure that had once seemed so menacing, now reduced to nothing more than a shadow. The oppressive weight that had clung to her for so long lifted, and for the first time since stepping into the darkness of the night, she felt something akin to peace. Yet, it was an unsettling peace, one that did not belong in this eerie place. She could still hear the echoes of the figure's voice in her mind, as if he were still watching her from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. But the truth, as painful as it was, had been revealed. The man, if he could even be called that, was nothing more than a manifestation of her fears, her father's sins, and the dark legacy he had left behind. Eleanor glanced down at the knife in her hand, the steel still slick with the weight of the confrontation. She had taken control of her fate, taken back the power that had been stolen from her for so many years. But there was no triumph in her eyes, no victory dance. She felt empty, as if she had been drained of everything but the knowledge that the war was not yet won. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the room. Nothing had changed. The lantern flickered faintly in the corner, casting long wavering shadows across the floor. The thick, heavy air still clung to the walls, making it hard to breathe, as though the place itself resented her presence. But Eleanor wasn't afraid. She had faced the darkness and emerged from it. The world outside may still be shrouded in uncertainty, but she was no longer the woman who had stepped into the house all those months ago. She had found the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful. The legacy of her father, of her family, was hers to bear. And she would bear it, without fear, without hesitation. She made her way to the door, her footsteps echoing in the silence. As her hand reached for the doorknob, a sudden realization struck her. The door was no longer locked. It had never been. the shadows, the fears, the haunting figure. They had been part of the story she had told herself, the story that had held her captive. But the truth, the real truth, was that she had always been free. The moment she accepted that, everything changed. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the dimly lit hallway beyond. Eleanor stepped through it, her heart beating steadily in her chest. She had faced her past and conquered it. The truth had been set free, and with it, her future. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft, golden glow over the world. The first light of dawn filtered through the trees, painting the landscape in shades of pink and orange. It was a new day, a new beginning. Eleanor breathed in the fresh air, the cool morning breeze sweeping over her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she could face it. The darkness had tried to consume her, but she had survived. She would move forward, step by step, no longer defined by the past, but by the strength she had found within herself. As she looked toward the horizon, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The shadows were gone, and with them, the fear that had once controlled her. The road ahead was uncertain, but Eleanor knew one thing for sure. She was no longer afraid. The house behind her stood silent, its secrets buried once more, its dark legacy at an end. But for Eleanor, the real journey had just begun. Eleanor never returned to the house on the hill. The town of Whitby, with its twisting streets and ancient history, would remain a chapter in her past. The shadows she had faced were now gone, and the truth she had uncovered had freed her. She moved on, rebuilding her life from the ground up. And though she carried the weight of her family's legacy, she no longer felt burdened by it. The fear that had once held her captive was gone, replaced by the knowledge that she had the power to choose her own path. In the end, Eleanor had learned that the greatest truth was not in the secrets others kept from her, but in the strength she discovered within herself. The shadows may have lingered, but they no longer had the power to define her. She was free.